Welcome to ET Global Town Hall. I'm Nabil A. Khan, and our keynote speaker for this session is one of the most committed business leaders who forged several globally successful businesses, Mr. Baba Kalyani, the chairman of Bharat Forge, the world's second largest forging manufacturer. Forged components are probably the oldest export business that India has been offering to the world. Under the impeccable and sagacious leadership of Mr. Baba Kalyani, Bharat Forge has created several milestones. The most unforgettable and important one is the company swiftness in terms of helping the country's army by providing emergency order of over 1 lakh shells for the Bofors guns as the Indian army was about to run out of ammunition during the Kargil war in 1999. Now, Baba Kalyani has not only been able to make more powerful guns than Bofors, but also aims to become world's one of the largest defense player in the next 6-7 years. So, with great pride, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Baba Kalyani to give his keynote address on the subject of global supply chain in a post-COVID world. Welcome to ET Global Town Hall, Mr. Baba Kalyani.
Thank you, Nabil. The post-COVID world, in terms of supply chain, is a very complex maze of structures. To understand that, one has to go back to what happened during the 90s and when the 21st century just began, just before the 2008 financial crisis. I think in those 15 odd years, India saw its liberalization process coming through. World became pretty flat. The word globalization really started meaning global trade, and that was the time when supply chains became truly global. And I think it was a period where you saw rapid rise of activity in China, economic activity, a reasonable rise of activity and industry in India. India also got integrated into the global supply chains, just pretty much like China, maybe at a lower scale. And you also saw the coming up of technology, the digital technology, the tech giants that came up, 4 in the United States, 3, 4 in China. And if you look at it today, it is technology, digital, and an interconnected world that kind of propels an economic activity. In terms of the post-COVID world, we have nodes of supply chain largely deciding in China for almost anything that you would like to do, whether it's automotive, whether it's electronics, whether it's consumer goods, whether it's toys, whether it's sportswear. The nodes, large amount of supply chain nodes reside in China. And I think the corona virus, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is now what it is called as, has ever since March created a big rethink in terms of supply chains. And we can see we are a global supplier. We supply to almost every OEM that makes automotive or industrial equipment around the world. And we see everybody started with something called a China plus one strategy. That means everybody had supply chains rooted in the China in their nodes, and they wanted additional supply chain. Obviously, companies will move supply chains to areas which is, let's say, more comfortable for them in terms of the quickness of doing things, the speed at which they can conduct business, the ease of doing business. Many of the things that we have heard our government also implement in the last 2-3 years, and more recently, the Honorable Prime Minister's Atma Nirbhar Abhiyan that has been started. But the key situation is that supply chains willy-nilly will get relocated and readjusted because of the pandemic. Nobody can over-depend on one node for a supply chain. And therefore, what happens in a post-COVID scenario, I think becomes very, very important. And very important for India and Indian companies and Indian businesses. And I think one needs to understand how supply chains evolve and how supply chains will develop and evolve as we go along in the next couple of years. And I think that's the main discussion, I believe, in today's topic of supply chains in a post-COVID-19 era. I want to just give 2 or 3 pointers for this. First is, I think India, the Indian government, many of the line ministries are taking some unprecedented steps to bring large companies in the supply chain into India, whether it's companies that make cell phones, or companies that make electronic products, companies that make semiconductors. We have a whole host of companies that make automobiles, and that are the earliest, let's say, internationalization of Indian manufacturing that took place in the 80s and the 90s. But in most other areas, we have kind of lagged behind. So what does that mean? That largely means that if we look at this as a opportunity to reset ourselves, this is a great opportunity to reset India in the direction of becoming Atma Nirbhar, in the direction of bringing in large companies into India. And I think Invest India is doing a great job in wooing companies and bringing them in here and creating the base with which a supply chain ecosystem will form. What do we have going for us in terms of positives? We have talent, a lot of young talent. We have a good understanding of technology. We have a good understanding of the digital world. And if we use all these 3 things together, and in almost any business, right from agriculture to consumers, durables to electronics to manufacturing automobiles or automobile components, you can use this and try to at least get leadership in 2 or 3 niche areas. And I think that's a big reset opportunity that India has. What we couldn't do for the last, let's say, 30 years, our dream is to grow beyond 10% a year. I think we should look at it in this new reset of the supply chain, that we start with today's base and not look at yesterday's base as a number. It's quite clear that in this year, 2021, the world is going to see negative GDP growth all over, and so are we. But we don't have to be disheartened by this. We should look at it as the base level from which we need to grow. And if we grow from here at 10, 12% per annum for the next 15, 20 years, we will become the 3rd largest economy on this planet and highly integrated in the post-COVID world supply chain.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kalyani, for putting it together. My first question would be, you took up the challenge of supplying shells to the Indian Army in a crisis situation where a lot of risk was involved. How did you manage this in such a short time? I think it's an exemplary, a matter of study for supply chain management. Can you give us a brief sense? How did you do it?
When you, it's all about technology and the ability to, put technology in different buckets, kind of desegregated. We are a company that has immense amount of knowledge in metallurgy and metallurgical processes, right from manufacturing of highly special materials, superalloy steel, to forging them, heat treating them, processing them, and of course machining them. And if you look at shells, it's nothing but making the right kind of material, forging it in the right way, machining and processing it in the right way to achieve all the properties that you need in a item like an artillery shell. And I think we were able to use our knowledge. And I think this is what I referred to in my talk a few minutes ago, that India has abundant talent in many different fields. Actually, in the field of metallurgy, our talent is the oldest. We have had institutions like the BHU, Banaras Hindu University, where the field of metallurgy was taught, I think, almost like 70, 80 years ago at a level which was considered extremely high in the world. So we have traditionally a lot of skills available, and now we have acquired digital skills. We are able to do things much faster using digital technology, and that should help us do this. And this is exactly what we did. We didn't have digital skills those days, but we certainly used our metallurgical skills, put them in different boxes, and converted them into manufacturing shells.
You talked about China plus one strategy for supply chain, but looking at the frenzy around the world, people are trying to build a supply chain which is minus China. Do you think it is possible anytime soon?
I think if you think that we can do without China being in the supply chain for the next few years, I think that's the impossibility, because supply chains are very, very complex structures. It is not just one part. One part has multiple supply chains by the time you get to that part. And that part going forward has a multiple manufacturers who convert it into a finished product that you really want. So it kind of goes back and forth in many parts of the world, many geographies, before it gets to a consumer. Whether that's a car, whether that's an air conditioner, whether that's a electronic gadget or a cell phone, but that's the reality of this. And therefore, it is very, very difficult to say that, okay, you're going to have a supply chain minus China anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that you have to be dependent on China. I think there's a big difference between having China in the supply chain and being dependent on China. Now, let me give you two examples about that. There's a lot of talk nowadays with the pandemic, COVID-19, that is creating havoc all around the world, and especially in India. A lot of talk about how the pharmaceutical industry is gearing up to produce more products for the welfare and health care of the world. And I think Indian pharma companies have done exceedingly well in this. But there is one major ingredient that is missing in our entire supply chain in the pharma business, and that is API. And the APIs are being imported from China. Now, I don't know whether you're aware of this or not, but in the 70s, India used to make its own APIs. And we lost that business because we didn't pay attention to it. So it's not that we never made APIs. It's not that it's a technology that's very alien to us. If we make up our minds in a few years, we can become the largest API manufacturers to the world. So I think it's a question of, are we dependent on something and therefore it is irreplaceable, or are we in a ecosystem of supply chains where China is one of the nodes? And I think the second part is very difficult to remove, because China is a large economy. It's five times larger than India, and it continues to grow, and therefore it will remain in the supply chain. But I don't think we need to be dependent on it.
The post-COVID world has changed everything from geopolitical scenario to global trade relations. In such a scenario, which sector or geography you think will emerge as winner or a challenger to China?
I think, fundamentally, this challenge also creates opportunity. As you have seen, even pre-COVID, many countries, many developed countries have been talking a political language of nationalism. Everybody wants to bring manufacturing back into their countries. This was even before the pandemic really started. Of course, the onset of the pandemic, early part of this year, has kind of accelerated that process, and now it's created into a not just a process because of the pandemic, but it's also got converted in terms of trade wars and all the things that you keep hearing in the media about what's happening between China and the rest of the world, including India, in terms of what's happening at our borders. So I think, this process is pretty much what will determine how things happen. I think everybody is going to take a piece of the pie. No piece of the pie is going to remain with any one country or any two or three countries. Some of it is going to remain in China, no matter what we do. But to us and to many countries like us, it's a huge opportunity to kind of reset ourselves. If we reset ourselves, then say we grow from here, in 10 years, we can have an extremely large manufacturing base.
You talked about every country in the world having its own share in the pie. For India, what kind of pie do you see? And same for the developing countries like Europe, US, and Japan, and also the developing countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Brazil, etc. when it comes to global supply chain?
India, the piece of the pie will be in areas where we have basic technological strength. If you have technology, if you have connectivity, you understand the digital. Digital is going to be a common thread no matter which business you're in. So if you understand this, and if you are able to connect to the global customer base, you are going to win. So if I look at India, the areas where we are currently very, very strong is pharmaceuticals, and I think we are going to get even more stronger in that area with more backward integration into API and basic chemicals and more R&D and innovation in terms of medicines. Second is automotive components. I think we are extremely competitive in that around the world. And not only competitive, we are technically getting far better than the rest of the world in this area. And we are connected with the whole world in terms of being in the supply chain. We are digitally very savvy. Most companies now work on digital platforms. This work from home has kind of encouraged creation of digital platforms. And people have found out to their amazement that if you work digitally, your productivity goes up 30-40%. So, this is an unseen benefit that most companies have derived. The other areas where India will gain tremendous prominence, as I see going forward, will be in electronics, because we are a large consumer of these products with the population that we have, whether it's cell phones, whether it's televisions, whether it's any other electronic systems, consumer product systems. I think India will become a very, very big manufacturer today. Today, all we are doing is importing materials and assembling and selling. And I think that will stop. The government policy is moving in that direction. And when you come to the subsystems that go into all this, I'll give you a simple example. You take air conditioners. I remember the days in the 70s when I started working, air conditioners were treated as a luxury item which had a duty of 300%. And you're not supposed to use air conditioner. It was looked at like that. Today we make, I don't know how many million air conditioners a year. And there's a heart of the air conditioner is a compressor that compresses the gas and produces this cooling effect. That compressor is pretty much comes from abroad. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there used to be compressor plants in India making this. So products like that will be made in India, which are made in China today. And I believe there are many, many products. You can make a list of 100 products that where we can gain, let's say, world dominance in terms of our manufacturing capability. Now, this is of manufactured product. If I come to other products, you look at footwear, you look at textiles, you look at things like that. Now, we have a lot of skilled people in India who know how to make footwear, but they don't have the technology. They don't have the same knowledge that the Italian foot maker has. They don't have ability to convert a design into a product in 24 or 48 hours, which China has mastered with digital technology. But that, it wouldn't take us more than 3 months to make that happen in India. If we just, put our minds to it and set up a process and train people. So there are many such traditional areas of where Indian artisans work. I mean, there's a lot of textiles that are made by artisans in Banaras, in Mysore, even in Pune. There's something called a Puneri sari. And in many parts of the world. I mean, you have chicken coming from Lucknow, for example. Now, why haven't people converted that into a mega business? I think the missing link is making it digital, bringing technology in, training people, and getting them access to the world, to the markets. And I think that's not happening as I see it.
What is your message to the global corporation to invest in India and make it a hub for global supply chain? Which are the sectors or which are the businesses that you think the global corporation come to India and set up their global hub for supply chain?
My message to global manufacturers is that India is a large consuming country. Even today, we buy something like $50-60 billion worth of products from China. And many of them are in the category that you've talked about. And I think the global manufacturers do understand this whole concept of India's consumer capabilities. And I think it is the right time, because there are very few other areas where they can go. There was one area, China, where everybody went for the last 20 years. but that is increasingly getting saturated and politically problematic for many countries. There are all kinds of things happening right from Australia to South China Sea to the US, and of course, even on our borders. And therefore, the next largest market is India. And I think global manufacturers do understand this. The Indian government is doing a tremendous job. The DPIIT, the Invest India organization, the PMO, and all the line ministries. I mean, there's some tremendous work that is going on in this country to bring in global manufacturers, make them understand what's happening to the market, handhold them, and get them to start manufacturing. And I think you'll see this happening sooner rather than later.
What message do you have for the Indian manufacturer to go on the global pedestal to serve the international market in supply chain?
You can't get a better opportunity than this. If you have knowledge of your product, if you have technology, if you have skilled people, the market is waiting for you. There are people who are waiting to buy your product. And I think there is a lot of help available from the government. We have this production-linked incentive scheme that has come out, where if you keep increasing your manufacturing in particular areas, the government is incentivizing you to do that. Therefore, I think you don't want to lose this opportunity. If you lost this opportunity in the next, let's say 2, 3, 4 years, then you'll never make it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kalyani, for taking time out and joining ET Global Town Hall.
My pleasure.